Today we have with us Dr. Preeti Raghunath, and she will be speaking on community radio policies in South Asia, a deliberative policy ecology approach. This work will be released as a book with Palgrave Macmillan in a few months. She's an alumna of our department, where she was also associated with the UNESCO Chair for Community Media. She's currently working with the Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication, Pune, and is one of the founders and editors of the Media Anthropology Research Collective South Asia. Her work has received awards and grants from the International Association for Media and Communication Research, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Center for Global Communication Studies, Annenberg School of Communication, and the Indian Council for Social Science Research. She has very kindly prepared a short reading list for us, and I'm sending all of the above mentioned items as links in the chat for everyone to access. Hello, Dr. Preeti Raghunath. Welcome. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Davina, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be back at my alma mater. It's been a year since I defended my thesis, and in this 1 year, I've used this time to upgrade it to a book, which will be released in a couple of months. So for today's talk, when you suggested that I talk about my work a bit and also talk a little bit about the book, I decided that I won't subject the department to narrative ethnographic detail from my work. Instead, I'll talk about a theoretical framework that came out from the data and emerged through my research. Before I go on to that, I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction about what my work was all about. For my doctoral research, I looked at policy making for community radio in 4 countries of South Asia, beginning with Sri Lanka, Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. I'd like to explain the contours of my work first. The idea was when one thinks of a policy study, one thinks of a policy document full of legalese written in legal jargon and something that lawyers and administrators tinker with and try and put in words that they might eventually use for loopholes. When I wanted to do a study of policy, I thought I should go beyond the policy document. Of course, policy documents are important, but to try and go beyond that, to conduct an ethnographic study of the policy making process, to try and see how various actors, one always looks at towards the state for a study of policy or as the administrator of policy. But I wanted to try and see if it is not, especially over the last 3 decades, it's not just the state which has been making policy, but a host of other actors have been involved in the policy process, especially in areas of media development and media assistance in the developing world. So it is through this that this idea that I thought I could go beyond the study of policy to try and locate it in a post-positivist critical approach to the study of policy making. Policy making in itself has not received too much attention in media and communication studies. A lot of policy work has been about studying the policy documents, studying the policy process, if you will. But over the last few years, there's been a lot of interest in the politics of policy making. For instance, Darth Friedman talks about the idea of policy activism in the policy space, and this is something that appealed to me. So the activism really comes up when you design your study to include not just the mainstream policy actors, but a host of other actors like activists, advocacy groups, grassroots movements, international donor agencies, as well as in my study and in this case, community radio stations where policies, nationally ordained or nationally made policies, find practical implementation. That's a brief about my work. I've been very interested in looking at the idea of deliberation, which is a process of communication again, and has not received too much attention beyond political philosophy. Has not found a lot of mention in communication studies, at least. So looking at deliberation as an epistemology, as a way of knowledge, approaching knowledge, as a way of looking at meaning making in the policy process. And through this, I went on to look at a deliberative policy analysis put forth by Haja and Bagina. These two scholars have been very famous in their, deliberative policy analysis has been rooted in critical policy studies. They look at how they look at capturing deliberation in the policy process. They look at capturing discourses in the policy process. And they look at how one can conduct a deliberative policy analysis of the policy process as well as the policy documents. So for this, I conducted about 100 interviews and had about 100 interviews and informal conversations with a host of actors across venues in 4 countries of South Asia. And drawing on the data, and it took me quite some time to navigate through all of this. Drawing on the data, I came and using grounded theory, the tenets of grounded theory, I looked at how one could construct a theory for the study of media policy. And if you torture the data enough, it confesses. And that's what happened with my case, though I was equally tortured. So the key tenets of my work is something I'll be talking about now. It's an emic approach to the study of policy making. It's a policy ethnography. And while a lot of studies in the realm of community radio have looked at the medium, I chose to locate it in a non-media centric approach. And this has been talked very recently in this particular book, which just got released by Brockler and Budka. And the idea was not to reify the medium as such, but to look at the policy process in the context of community radio, which has been very strongly rooted in the decolonial, because I've looked at I've tried to ensure that we don't only have to contend with what is an official history that the state or dominant actors besides the state propagate. I wanted to talk to various kinds of policy actors to try and bring in as many perspectives, especially in terms of piecing together micro histories. It's a contemporary history that I was looking at for community radio, especially emerging from Sri Lanka and Nepal. And this has been useful in piecing together the entire story of how community radio entered South Asia and who got involved and how the entire story went on. I was also looking at a multiplicity of policy venues, especially one often thinks of policies being made in ministerial boardrooms and also maybe chambers of corporations. But I was looking at how policies are also made at a range of non-formal, informal venues, like on track to dialogues, spaces of advocacy where you invite policy actors from the government and various other policy actors to interact and put forth their ideas. So as part of that, I was part of 2 regional seminars focused on South Asia, where a number of policy advocates, policy actors came together. And these sites served as important sites for my ethnography. Similarly, normatively, located in, it draws on critical media policy studies, which means that there were a range of values, norms, and interests that I could tap into, because these are genuinely at play, especially when various kinds of the actors come in to the picture. The idea was to try and see, for instance, if you have an international donor agency versus a multilateral international agency versus an intergovernmental body, a grassroots movement, how do you ensure what kind of interests are at play? Why are they interested in something like community radio? These were some of the questions I went with. And it was also important to navigate multiple layers and nodes of networks in the policy process. Essentially, I was looking at a very complex policy process for community radio. And this, while I was grappling with this led me to try and understand the ecological thinking around policy making. This I'm sorry, but the next few slides will be slightly more theoretical than usual, because I'm not going to use my time to delve into policy narratives. I've already done that a few times at the department, and I'll be happy to talk about it during the question and answer session or even otherwise. My book is full of ethnographic insights and a lot of quotes from people and a lot of narratives of the policy process for community radio. I started off by looking at constructivism because it offers fertile ground to look at constructs of by policy actors of community radio, of themselves, of each other in the policy process, of the various kinds of interactions, etc. Constructivism is a middle range theory. It offers fertile ground to look at norms, values, and interests. However, and that's because you have various constructions of of community radio, but also of policy actors coming from them. However, with constructivism, you have while constructivism has constructs of realities that it offers, one has to conduct with the singular reality that are to do with structures and systemic characteristics. Um, so the dialectics of reconciling context, the constructions of realities, allows the researcher to go beyond a closed systemic approach in search of a heuristic device. I've shared a document with Davina. It's from the book, where I theoretically flesh out constructivism and how one needs to go beyond that, especially since the state is no longer privileged as a policy actor over the last 3 decades, especially after the Cold War. You have a host of actors coming into play, especially in international development and media development. So I looked at a few policy architectures that enable the study of policy, and I was able to critically appreciate them for their offerings. These are some of them: transnational advocacy network, advocacy coalition framework, epistemic communities, theorizing on social movements, the idea of civil society and political society. So these were some of the offerings. These were some of the policy architectures that I was looking at to study policy making for community radio. And if you look at the document, I've been able to appreciate their usefulness while also looking at the shortcomings that each of these frameworks that contain. None of them were useful to explain the policy process for community radio in total. And from here, it led me to move on to, I went to media ecology studies too, but however, media ecology refines the medium. In any case, understanding ecology and ecological thinking was very much at the forefront of my thinking, because it's an inclusive heuristic that it offers. This is how ecology, the metaphor of ecology, has been defined in different kinds of policy studies. While structuralism offers it offers the option of looking at the various interconnections between the political, the social, and the economic aspects. It is bound by bounded rationality, and I was looking at an open heuristic. This is important because it allows for externalities like the entry and agency of newer policy actors, transnational advocacy movements. It also helps you comprehend uncertainties brought about by ecosystem-bound shifts, and it helps you trace policy over time. Each of these frameworks that I spoke about, none of them could trace policy over time or the transformation of policy actors into other kinds of actors. For instance, when some actors start off as advocates or activists but become content syndicates, for instance, in Nepal. So these were some of the things I was grappling with. By drawing on ecology, one is able to synthesize policy architectures that I spoke about and their subsystemic attributes, while also cutting across political systems of differing natures. I'll come to that in a bit. And therefore, then I was looking at deliberation as an epistemology. It is premised primarily on intersubjectivities. It is critical. It is useful to address difference, the power operating in the policy process, and certain other concerns of post-structuralists, and that often come up. This is the definition. This is a good definition of deliberation put forth by Mansbridge, and this is something that I went by. If you look at the policy document, I look at various aspects of deliberation. I look at how various kinds of theorists have theorized deliberation in the context of looking at deliberative democracy work, and one often has to contend with whether deliberation means coming to an agreement through consent and through justification of one's policy arguments, or does it respect difference? These were some of the ideas I was looking at. And in my study, which is a critical study of policy making, deliberation helped me locate ideas of agonism and ground up policy making in the policy ecology. And all of this essentially looks at Habermasian ideas of speech act and communicative action. And drawing on all of this, this is what I ended up with, which is a deliberative policy ecology. The danger of traditional media ecology work is that it reifies the medium in question. However, mine was more of a humanist inquiry. Without reifying the policy actors or the larger ecology and various other aspects. The policy, I don't know if this is going to be absorbed easily, but if you read the document, I theoretically work out how the policy ecology houses the policy continuum. So a lot of scholars have looked at, when you talk about constructivism for being relativist and ecology as being all-encompassing and bound and closed, one looks at how scholars have spoken about how one needs to look at it as a continuum. And this is what was useful for me. I look at how the policy ecology houses the policy continuum, which includes a number of policy processes, a number of acts of policy making involved, which itself is an iterative process. It's an iterative, deliberative, dialectical process emerging out of constructions of policy actors themselves, and of other actors. There's competing rhetoric and rationalities, and not necessarily instrumental rationalities, but also emotive rationality, especially for a medium that is premised on social change, in a spatio-temporal context that bring in socio-economic, political, and cultural aspects. I was able to, I'd like to talk about Nepal, at least for my work right now. Nepal is a great example of how they didn't have a policy document per se for community radio, but the policy making process was very much on, and it is truly an activist kind of policy making that Das Friedman talks about. Also further, these iterations and reiterations continue to figure in the instrumental aspect of the policy process as well. And Bangladesh is a great example for that, because they've revised the policy document a few times based on practice, based on advocacy, official and non-official efforts. The deliberative policy ecology approach helps go beyond Western philosophies to the study of policy, because it's not located or restricted to the experiences of liberal democracies alone. It can be applied to a range of political systems. And all these activities in the policy space or ecology allow for the study of deliberation in an ecology. It allows to draw on Habermasian communicative action. And that's where you come to the idea of deliberative potential. When you talk about exporting democracy to other countries in the non-West, one is, it's essentially a blueprint from the Western world that you're transferring, especially through aid programs and aid architectures. But when you look at something like deliberative potential, you're able to locate it in various kinds of settings, including authoritarian settings where of societies in transition after civil wars, settings where peace building is beginning to happen, and the media plays an important role there. So through the process of community radio itself, but also the policy process, as a practice, you're able to locate the deliberative potential that a policy process has. It's marked by the ability of interlocutors to be reflexive about their individual roles as speakers and deliberators. You're able to look at contextual attributes that include regional, cultural aspects, so the social as well as the spatial. You're able to look at larger aspects like questions of power, governance, of structures, and the cultures and relations between policy actors that all of these engender. So I'll stop I'll stop talking about the approach there. What I've tried to do in the document that I've shared is to try and draw up a lot of literature on deliberation, a lot of literature on various kinds of policy architectures that one can work with. And I've tried to make a case for an ecological approach with and to look at deliberation not just as a systemic attribute, but as an ecological one. So I make a case for deliberation in an ecology, in a policy ecology. I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to take more questions about my experiences in the field, ethnographic data, narratives that emerge from the field, etc. This is how my book is structured. I have 7 chapters. I start with media policy studies and community media. I then go on to talk about the deliberative policy ecology approach to media policy. I have a chapter on the post-colonia and its radio, which is a bit of a historiography. I then have a chapter called the global public sphere, how from colonial radio we've moved to opening up of radio to communities in South Asia. The 5th chapter looks at the various kinds of policy actors that emerged in the space and their narratives of practice. I then come to address liminality, sustainability, and the state as you progress in time. And the last chapter is a critical comparative ecology. I looked at the ideas of connectedness, contestation in the policy process, and comparativity to the extent that it's possible between the 4 countries that I studied. Yeah, I'd like to end the presentation there, and I'll be happy to take any questions of any kind on the study or my theory or any other aspects. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Preeti. This presentation draws on critical media policy studies and stitches together a critical media policy ethnography to present deliberative policy ecology approach. And to know more about this novel approach, you will have to buy Preeti's book. So we'll have live questions.
Your library, libraries to get it.
Oh yeah, you can ask your university libraries to get it as well. So we'll have live questions from the Zoom meeting participants shortly. I'll ask you all the Zoom chat and the FB live questions towards the end of the meeting, Preeti. We'll do the live Q&A first and then the chat questions or the comments questions. I request participants now to raise their hands. That's an option available on Zoom next to your username. And I will announce your names in order. Kindly turn on your microphone and or your video, depending on your connection, when it is your turn to ask. Please keep your questions as brief as possible so we can have a maximum round of questions for Preeti. Okay, so let me see who's raised their hands. And while we're waiting for questions to come via Zoom live Q&A, we have a question from Facebook right now. Okay, Pranay has shared it with me, and I'm going to share it with everyone. So Vincent D'Souza is asking, what role do commercial interests have on community radio policy?
On community radio policy.
Yes.
They have a huge influence because community radio has access to cheap spectrum. And we know that, at least in the commercial space, private FM channels shell out and their companies shell out a lot to buy spectrum. And because of the nature of community media and community radio, the access to spectrum is subsidized. And it is in this context that one can see competing interests, of course, at the level of the audience as well, and the kind of programming and all of that. But from the policy angle, it's to do with spectrum allocation.
So they can easily get in touch with a community radio and fund them, for instance, to get cheaper spectrum.
Well, private FMs can't really work with community radio and fund them, but one can see the contestation between community radio with FM players, especially in the third auction that happened, I think, in 2015 or 2016, which was just after I completed my field work. All the big players like Edel Media got all the, they got access to a lot of spectrum allocated to them.
Okay, so we have a few live questions coming in. I just mentioned the order in chat. Could we have Venu Arora, please turn on your microphone and video if possible, and you could please ask your question. Next will be Professor Kanchan Malik.
Hi, Preeti, lovely to hear you speak. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
So I had just a follow-up to what you just said. So is your study showing that commercial radio stations do have, because that's what Devina just asked you, that do they have or the question that was asked was, they have an influence on community radio policy. So is your study showing that commercial radio stations do indeed have influence on community radio policy? I just want to clarify that because it didn't seem to be quite clear from your response. Just coming to my own question, I was just curious that in your talk you said that a state is not a large controlling actor. And I'd really love to hear you speak a little bit more on that, because from our work in India, clearly, no matter how much advocacy we have done, the state does have a fairly large control on how the policy contours finally work out. So it'll be interesting to hear, some more around that. And I would also be very interested to know how, in your study, you've been able to frame, how do the tensions within the movement kind of emerge in the final policy contours that happen. So again, talking from my own experience within India, it will be useful to understand whether the scale of existing tensions within the movement are ultimately detrimental to the progressive nature of the final policies that emerge. So those were my two questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
When it comes to private, what I said, from my understanding, I don't see them directly impinging on the community radio policy, but they have a huge influence on the broadcast policy in any case, or any kind of broadcast policy. And therefore, in a broadcasting system, they have that amount of influence. And that, I think, would eventually leave very little room for community radio. That's one. Your second question about the state not being an important factor. Well, I didn't mean to say that in practice the state is not an important policy actor. At least in South Asia, the state is predominantly the administrator of policy, and there are no two ways about it. But what I meant was traditional study of policy processes, or just the study of media policy, has privileged the state actor or private players. They've not allowed enough space for the non-state actors, various kinds of non-state actors like movements, like activists and advocates. And my effort was to try and open up that black box to various kinds of policy actors as a study. And the state definitely is a very, very important player. And I mean, it's the main actor when it comes to implementation of policy, at least. The third question was about, can you repeat the third question?
Yeah, sorry, I had muted my audio. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, I can.
Yeah, no, so I was essentially just wondering if your study showed any direct linkage between the tensions within movements
Sure,
and,
Yeah.
and the final policy outcomes that emerged. So if there was,
Yeah.
I mean, you focused on movements and other actors. So, and if there is, if there are tensions within that, how does that impact the final policies that
Sure.
do emerge?
Well, I think tensions were quite apparent, especially when you have various kinds of bodies operating in a policy space, taking on different hues from being activists to start off with, but becoming, for instance, in Nepal, you have content syndicates emerging, which is antithetical to the idea of community radio, programming. So also in India, you have various kinds of policy actors now. And I think this emerged through interviews with government policy actors, like the Joint Secretary from the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, who was quite candid in saying that we have different players now, and it's a small sector, and you don't need so many of them competing with each other with their own interests at stake. And therefore, whether it's detrimental to the community radio movement in itself, well, it has that, the influence, it has that amount of influence, especially when you have practitioners involved, you have early advocates and activists involved. And one cannot fault that, because in a country like India, which I'm hoping still is a vibrant democracy, you do have competing visions for a particular sector. And the Joint Secretary did say that it's nice that you have so many players, because they bring in that amount of variety without it being dictated by one central kind of a body or authority. But from my understanding, it dilutes the movement, because it can be brought together um, to bring in a lot of strength in terms of advocating with the state. So vis-a-vis the state, it dilutes the movement, and therefore I do think that it is antithetical to the idea of community radio.
Okay, I hope that answers your questions, Venu ma'am. We'll now move to the next questions. Kanchan ma'am has raised her hand.
Yeah.
Could you please? Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Okay. Preeti,
Yes, ma'am.
good to listen to your presentation. Very interesting, and a good reflection on the book that we are looking forward to. Yeah, my question is a simple one. I wanted to ask you that you would agree that complexity is part of any deliberative approach. That's what you've been trying to say, and your thesis and your other work is also, argues in favor of that. Now, while you as an academic, other academics, advocates are sensitive to this, right? And they talk about this. How do you sensitize the policymakers, to this aspect of complexity? Because they think they are the final voice, for any policy to be, to come about. So, do you find a conflict there?
Sure. When we say policy makers, you mean the state? Because I'm talking
state,
about
yes.
all kinds of actors as policy actors and policy makers.
Absolutely.
Sure. The state, at least in South Asia and in much of the it has traditionally had a lot of control over broadcasting, and it still does.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, getting them to loosen up a little bit and allow other kinds of policy actors to take charge of the situation, to take charge of the policy process, is a challenge. But the idea of there's something called the idea of policy transfer in a lot of literature on policy and policy architectures, like the transnational advocacy the TAN and the Advocacy Coalition framework, you have international actors coming in and working with grassroots movements precisely for that. You have these non-formal venues precisely for that. And the process of policy transfer and policy education as an epistemic process happens in these non-formal venues. And that's why it was important to talk about these non-formal venues besides the formal policy making ministerial boardrooms as such. And therefore, it's an extremely important process. There are no shortcuts. The state does make it difficult, but I think it has to be an ongoing process. And one has to look at policy over time. And the idea is to also try and map the deliberative potential in a policy process. I mean, one can bring together various stakeholders and policy actors, but what kind of space do we allow them for them to communicate, for them to deliberate with each other, to offer justifications in the policy process from their own vantage point, to revise their policy submissions and attitudes towards a certain aspect in the policy process. These are all things that happen over time, and it's important to study that as well, because that would be a complete study of the complexity of a policy process.
Does that answer your question, Kanchan ma'am? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on. We have next questions by Usha ma'am, Vinod sir, and Hasina. Usha ma'am, if you could please turn on your microphone.
So can you hear me? Yeah. So my question is a little bit beyond the study itself, more to do with the process of writing ethnography. Now here you have, I mean, it's a messy process, as you've indicated, and it's extremely complex, as Kanchan alluded to. So how does one, in the act of writing, which is probably the most difficult part of an ethnography, how do you, which is the story you decide to tell, and what do you leave out? So here you have, like, there's a big actor, right? The policy itself. And then you have all these other actors who contribute to that. So how did you figure out how to, how to pick up the narrative threads and put it down?
Can I go ahead with answering this? Okay. So, I mean, writing, I mean, it took me a long time to finish the PhD precisely because of that, because I was struggling with piecing all of this together and giving it, I mean, I also didn't want to do away with the messiness and sanitize it and put it together as a narrative that is linear in time and space. It was important to also showcase the contestation. So what I did was to try and pick up thematic threads, and if there were competing narratives, for instance, there are, at least when it comes to narrating history of the policy process and historical events and moments, there was a lot of contradiction between what policy actors said. For instance, one policy actor would say that they had more influence and they were the ones who passed a particular document or worked on a particular document and therefore owned the ideas to it, versus another kind of policy actor saying the same thing in a sense. So what I did was to try and open it up to various kinds of contestation. So I have competing narratives. There are a lot of descriptions, but it is very richly ethnographic in the sense that I have a lot of quotations. My major effort was to not to leave out any kind of narrative. I did not leave out narratives because that would be, that would go against the idea of culling micro histories and piecing it together and giving a complex whole. It's a complex process, but it's also a very, it's dynamic, but it's one also sees the complete picture. And it was important to give the wholesome kind of a picture to this particular study, and therefore I did not leave out anything. The idea was to try and arrange it in a way that showcased the dynamism, the contestation, and intellectual effort in bringing together some kind of comparativity pointing out loopholes and pointing out efforts that did not make it to official history. That was the effort.
Sorry. Can I just ask a follow-up question, Davina, very quickly?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so, very often in an ethnography, the effort, and you did use the word emic, right? You do want to give an emic perspective. So was there an effort to go back to your interlocutors and say, this is the story I'm telling, and, how do you react to it?
Well, I did not go back to them after writing it. I've been in touch with them using via Facebook and email, and they were all looking forward to what I had written. But what I did in the process of interviewing was to try and do this contestation, where I was going to one kind of policy actor, and one knows that the policy process and the policy actors and this particular space itself is like any other space, political space is riddled with politics, and you have allegations and you have counter allegations and you have the politics of it all. And therefore the idea was to try and shuttle between various kinds of policy actors to try and see if there is one version coming out of one person. I take that to the other person and say, so this person has said this. Do you have something to say about it, or what is your experience like? And therefore that helped me draw on the contestations, but also the bigger picture and the larger picture.
Does that answer your question, Usha ma'am?
Yes, you can go ahead.
So next we have Vinod sir. If you could please turn on your microphone and video.
Hi, Preeti.
Hello, sir.
So congratulations again on the book. It's
Thank you.
Nice to see in this shape that you presented. Nice to see the chapters coming together thematically and all that. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book. So my question is more to push a conversation on the conceptual discussion that you started. In terms of ecology, so the idea of ecology is not all that new in media and communication studies, right? I mean, we have at least a history of some 50 years. If you go back to, the work of Neil Postman, 1968, David Altheid's 1970s work. I mean, each one using it in a slightly different way. Sandra Ball-Rokeach's work on communication ecology. More recently, Joe Taki and others using communicative ecologies. Right now, we have, I think, 2 or 3 PhD students, I don't know if they are on the call today, who are using this notion of communicative ecologies for their own work. And I think Usha Raman in her own new project is engaging with communicative ecologies. Although I think you are looking at an ecological approach to policy studies and specifically to media policy, to study of media policy. So is there a way that in the book or in the work that you're engaging with now, do you engage with this wider conceptualization of ecology in the field in media and communication studies? And how do you distinguish it from a policy ecology approach to media? I mean, I don't know if I, go ahead.
Sure. So I'm familiar with the work, especially on communicative ecologies, because it's the most recent one, but also going back all the way to try and see, I mean, my main intention was to steer clear of technological determinism of any kind. And therefore, I didn't want to reify, I mean, when I'm talking about policy ecology, I mean, the idea was to also not to reify the ecology itself, or the policy process, or the various kinds of actors involved. So the idea was to try it, because it's a study, and the approach is a theoretical approach to study a policy process or the policy ecology. I didn't want to try and say that it's focused on a particular media, or this is the way media policy studies has to happen. The idea was to open it up in the ways that I spoke about to various kinds of competing interests and various kinds of policy actors. And so the determinism aspect was what I was looking at more keenly. I mean, in communicative ecology, they speak about 3 layers and they operationalize it. So when I'm operationalizing it for my work, it emerges in the form of narratives interspersed with, I mean, of course, narratives by policy actors, interspersed with key policy moments. So it pieces together a story it's not not a linear fashion, but to try and bring together hopefully the messiness of the policy process. I think that's key. The everyday messiness of the policy making process, inclusive of the actors and their interests and the politics of it all, besides the context, which is extremely important, the socio-economic and political, cultural context of each of these countries located in South Asia, in the non-West. I mean, these were some of the normative aspects that I was bringing in to the study of policy. I'm not sure if it answers your question, but I'd love to engage with that further.
No. I mean, this is a question beyond your dissertation and the book. I'm just thinking, as you're sort of pushing the policy ecology approach in a wider sense in the discipline, I'm thinking it helps to create a dialogue with what has gone on already, so that the discipline, progresses as a whole, right? I mean, the policy ecology approach is definitely useful as against the approach that you had, I think, somewhat caricatured about, approach that looks at documents and so on. It's definitely an advance over that, right? But in doing that, it will be useful if you sort of engage in a dialogue with the discipline's efforts to engage with communication and media ecologists in various ways. I mean, and you critique it in advance. So
so
maybe you do that in the book. I'm not sure. Yeah.
If you look at the document that I've shared, I've done a little bit of that. Though, I mean, I've drawn on media ecology and communicative ecology a bit, but also I've looked at the works on political ecology and cultural ecology and what they look at.
Right.
Organizational studies looks at ecology in a particular way. So the idea was to try and grapple with the architecture. That was my focus. And I was not looking at the discipline or media studies and communication studies per se. But what I think is also interesting is to try and, it's not been done before, to try and look at deliberation as an act of communication. I think that would be important for communication studies and media studies. So that's something that I'm very interested in pushing forward. More than, I mean, of course, the ecology aspect is there, but the idea of deliberation, if one can come up with a qualitative, I don't know if one can call it a set of indicators, but to try and see if you can map deliberation in a policy process or measure its potential, not in a quantitative way, but in a qualitative fashion. I think that's what I'm hoping to do further.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna have, because we're running out of time. I'd like to go on to Hasina next quickly. Are you online, Hasina? Can you please unmute yourself and turn on your video if possible? Okay, so since I'm not getting Hasina online, could we please move on to Anjali, ma'am? Are you there?
Hello.
Oh, Hasina is here. Okay, great. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. So, hi, Preeti. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
My question was about this deliberative potential policy ecology. Anyway, you somewhat answered the question, but still, if you can, throw a bit light more on this deliberative part, particularly because you were talking about dialogue in some sense, and you were also talking about epistemology. So, what is the nature of that relation and epistemology, deliberation, and all you were about? If you could say more about that, it would be helpful. And I'm also interested to know how do people negotiate this policy space?
Sure.
You might have said it before somewhere, but yeah, I'm also interested in knowing, we are making policies in a AC room or something, whatever it is. Okay, we are talking about deliberation and all, but still, uh, how does it get communicated to the people who are actually doing this community radio, working in that particular space and all? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Hasina. So the first, I'll answer the second question first. When you say people, for my work, I look at them as policy actors themselves. Community radio stations and the people associated with them are policy actors because they're part of the policy process in a number of ways. At the station level, they engage with a nationally made policy. They operationalize it for their own station. That's one act. Similarly, they're part of these. For instance, in India, you have the Community Radio Sammelan, which is a congregation of community radio practitioners and activists and advocates and people in that particular space. So they also are part of the policy process in a lot of ways. They engage with other policies that intersect with the community radio policy. For instance, the spectrum allocation plan, or working with the other ministries that are involved in the technicalities of community radio. Besides, of course, the various government schemes and things like that at their own station level, corresponding to the state and the central government. So I look at them as policy actors, and they are very much part of the policy process. That's one. The question about deliberation and deliberative potential, if you look at the document that I've shared, I've drawn out various definitions and approaches to deliberation, how various scholars in the field of deliberative democracy, which is growing now and is very important in political philosophy, how they are engaging with deliberation, not just in the theoretical aspect, but also practically when they organize mini talks or policy open houses. There are a number of instruments and locations where deliberations happen, and then they study that. So that is the empirical aspect, but theoretically also, I've looked at how scholars have, for instance, taken a generational approach to the study of deliberation. Some scholars have decided to conceptualize deliberation and offer limitations. How is it different from discourse? For instance, policy discourses, that's a whole other kind of literature. So what is it about deliberation that makes it useful for my particular study? Something that I've looked at in the document. I'll be happy to share it with you. And it's there in the book.
Okay, I'm going to request the speaker and everybody else to please give us an extension of 10 minutes, because there are two very interesting questions that I'd like Preeti to answer. So I hope it's okay if we wrap up the meeting by, say, 1:10. Okay, Anjali ma'am, if you're online, could you please ask your question? It's sort of, taking the discussion that we've already had forward.
So Preeti, that was a lovely presentation. Thank you for that. Very informative. Mine is a very basic question. I want to ask, who are the main drivers, the powers that be in community media in South Asia, who call the shots vis-a-vis policy framing? Thanks.
Sure. The effort was to try and spread that kind of power across different sites of policy making and different kinds of policy actors, however powerful or less powerful they are. But I think international development agencies and media development agencies, donor agencies, I think they've played a huge role in the policy process, but also in transferring the idea of community media and working with grassroots activists and strengthening movements in countries. They've played a huge role, and it's a fascinating story that is there. Be a big part of the study of international development. So, I don't know if are more powerful, and if they are the powers that be, the states are actually the powers that be. But the more interesting actor definitely are international media development, media assistance agencies.
Okay, so the next question is coming from an FB Live comment. It's by Bishwadeep Bhattacharya, and I've also posted it on chat in case everybody wants to look at it. So he's a research scholar, and he's asking if you could talk about how policies of the Bangladesh government are hindering the progress of building a community public sphere in the Latadia, Bangladesh, which is one of the largest brothels in Bangladesh. Did you happen to do any work around this area, Preeti, for your
well, I have to say that I'm not familiar with the area. I've looked at the policy making process in Bangladesh and the couple of iterations of policy documents that they've had. I don't know if it's actually hindering the process of building a public sphere anywhere. In fact, Bangladesh, though it has happened in a phased manner, is the more vibrant sectors that we have in the region. Does that answer the question? It's a little bit out of the purview of my work.
Yeah, exactly. So we have we started a question from this person, Vincent D'Souza, but he has a lot of other questions which I've posted in chat right now. He's a journalist from Chennai, and he's wondering if private FM can squeeze out CR to get spectrum. I don't think that's possible because it's, I think, governed by a different set of guidelines. And do Indian political
Sorry, Devin, I'm losing you there. Do Indian political parties?
Yeah, I've also shared the question in chat, so you can refer to that.
And political parties played a role. I mean, if you look at who passed certain, the policies in India, you look at one understands. You can trace it back to the party that was in power. Don't have their policies and their media policies, but in India, community radio, the opening up of radio to communities has happened alongside liberalizing the policies to private players as well. So it's part of a move towards opening it up for the market, and by extension, feeling and being obligated to also bring in the social aspect of it and opening it up to and educational institutions as well. I do know that political parties at the local level have tried to own community radio stations through applying for licenses and things like that. I don't know if that answers your question, but so those are the two kinds of inputs I have on political parties and their interaction with community radio.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm afraid this is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Preeti.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah. And thank you so much. This is my first book talk, and it's special because I've been able to do it at my alma mater.
Absolutely. And we look forward to buying your book. We've already sent the link via chat here to pre-order, and I hope that we get to see the South Asian edition soon. Okay. Next Monday, we meet Professor Vinod Pavrala, who will discuss intangible outcomes in communication for social change, a conceptual exploration. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you next Monday.